fire filled my screen before the alarm even finished its first note. I did not wait for it to finish. My hands were already on the controls, pulling my ship out of the slip lane and pointing it straight at a mountain that was burning against the black sky of a strange moon. My name is Ethan Brooks. I fly cargo for a living, moving crates between quiet stations where nobody asks questions and nobody expects trouble. That night, trouble found me anyway. A distress signal had come through with a royal code attached to it, the kind that only a ruling family can send, and it was screaming from a palace that looked like it was being eaten alive by green-white flame. I did not know whose palace it was. I did not know who was inside it. All I knew was that the fire was spreading fast, and somebody down there did not have much time left. I brought my ship down hard on the edge of a garden that was still untouched by the flames, and the moment my boots hit the ground, the heat hit my face like a wall. Guards stood at a safe distance, watching the fire with wide eyes, doing nothing. Their armor was beautiful, polished, and completely useless against flame. One spark, and it would melt onto their skin. I grabbed the fire blanket from my emergency kit, soaked it fast in the water tank built into my ship, and wrapped it around my head and shoulders. Then I ran straight into the burning building, while every guard behind me shouted for me to stop. I did not stop. Some decisions do not leave room for thinking. This was one of them. Inside, the heat pressed down on me like a hand trying to push me back out the door. Smoke rolled across the ceiling in thick black waves, and the air tasted like melted metal. I kept low, the way I had been taught long ago, moving through a hallway where the paint on the walls was already bubbling. I heard coughing from a stairwell ahead. I followed the sound and found 3 shapes on the floor, thin and pale, dressed in fine robes that were now stained with soot. 2 of them were already unconscious. The third was still awake, barely, her eyes glassy, her breath coming in short, broken gasps. I did not know her name. I did not know her title. All I saw was a person who was seconds away from not breathing at all. I lifted her onto my shoulder, feeling how light she was, like her bones were made for a much gentler world than the one currently trying to burn her alive. I turned back the way I came, moving faster now because the ceiling above me had started to groan, a low, deep sound that told me it would not hold much longer. I made it down the stairs 2 steps at a time, the smoke thickening with every level, my lungs burning even through the wet cloth over my mouth. Behind me, something gave way with a crash that shook the floor under my boots. I did not look back. Looking back would have cost me half a second I did not have. I burst out through the front doors just as the whole east side of the palace folded in on itself, sending a wave of sparks and heat rolling across the garden. I kept running until I was far enough away, then I dropped to my knees and laid her gently on the grass. Her chest was barely moving. I tilted her head back, checked that nothing was blocking her throat, and stayed close, talking to her in a low, steady voice, even though I had no idea if she could understand a single word I was saying. Sometimes a voice is enough to hold a person to the world a little longer. The palace medics finally found their courage and came running across the lawn, pushing me aside gently to take over. I let them. My job was done, or so I thought. That was when the sky opened up. A massive cruiser dropped out of orbit, its hull catching the light of the still burning palace, followed by smaller ships that spread out in a wide protective circle. The cruiser landed on the far side of the garden, and its ramp lowered before the engines had even finished cooling. A woman stepped out. She was tall, taller than me, with silver eyes that caught the firelight and skin that seemed to shimmer faintly like glass under moonlight. She wore robes the color of deep space, and every guard on that hillside dropped to one knee the moment her boots touched the grass. She did not look at the burning palace. She did not look at the guards kneeling around her. She walked straight across the garden toward the medics, toward the girl lying on the stretcher, and her eyes locked onto her daughter's face. I understood then. This was no ordinary rescue. I had just carried a princess out of a burning building, and the woman now crossing the garden was her mother, and from the way every single person on that hillside moved out of her path, she was not just any mother. She was a queen. The queen knelt beside her daughter for a long moment, checking her breathing with her own hands before finally straightening up. Only then did her eyes turn to me. I was still on the grass, soot covering my clothes, the wet blanket now dry and stiff around my shoulders, my lungs still aching from the smoke. I felt very small under that silver gaze. "You carried my daughter out of the fire," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried across the whole garden like it had been built to be heard by everyone at once. "Yes," I said, my voice rough. "I heard the signal. I was close. I did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," she said. "You did not burn." "Not right away, no," I admitted. She studied me for a long moment, the way someone studies a puzzle that has suddenly solved itself in front of them. Then she turned to the crowd of nobles and guards who had gathered around us, still shaking from the fire, still covered in ash, and she raised her voice so that every one of them could hear what she said next. "The crown princess of this house will be married to this man before the next full turn of our moon," she said. "It is decided." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. The smoke had done strange things to my ears before, and I told myself this must be one of them. But the shocked silence that followed, the way every noble turned to stare at me, told me I had heard exactly right. "I am sorry," I said, forcing the words out. "Married? Your Majesty, I fly cargo. I own a ship with an engine that needs repair. I did not even know your daughter's name until this moment." "It is Ciela," the Queen said simply, as if that settled everything. "You will learn it well before the wedding." I looked past her, toward the stretcher where the princess now sat upright, wrapped in a warm blanket, her pale skin marked with soot, but her silver eyes clear and alert. She was listening to every word, and unlike me, she did not look shocked. She looked thoughtful, like someone quickly working through a puzzle of her own. "Mother," she said, her voice still rough from the smoke, "perhaps we should ask him first." "He walked into a burning building for a stranger," the Queen answered, still watching me rather than her daughter. "Among our people, that is not just bravery, that is proof. Our old stories are full of suitors who promised to walk through fire for the woman they wanted to marry. This man did not promise anything. He simply did it, for someone he had never met, without being asked and without any hope of reward. A man like that does not need to be tested further. He has already passed every test that matters." "That is very kind," I started, "but a wedding is a lot to decide in one evening." The princess finally spoke directly to me, her voice quiet but steady, despite the tremor still in her hands. "You do not have to agree," she said. "My mother speaks with great confidence, but confidence is not the same as being right." "Is she wrong this time?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. Ciela considered this carefully, the same way she seemed to consider everything, even now, even half recovered from smoke that had nearly taken her life. "I do not know yet," she said, "but I would like the chance to find out, if you are willing." I thought about my ship sitting quietly at the edge of the garden, its engine still needing repairs I had been putting off for months. I thought about the quiet, uneventful life I had been living before tonight, moving crates from one station to another, never staying anywhere long enough to be noticed. I thought about the moment I had run into that burning building without stopping to think about who I was running toward, or what species she might be. Some decisions do not wait for logic. They simply happen, and you find yourself living inside them before you even understand what you agreed to. "A full turn of your moon should be enough time to fix an old engine," I said slowly. The Queen's expression shifted into something that looked almost like satisfaction, as if she had known my answer long before I said it aloud. Ciela laughed, a real laugh, still rough from smoke but full of genuine warmth, and for the first time since I had landed on that burning hillside, the ruined palace behind us no longer felt like the most important thing happening there. The days that followed moved faster than I expected. Word of the rescue spread across the moon within hours, and by the next morning, crowds had gathered outside the palace grounds, just to catch a glimpse of the human who had walked into fire without hesitation. I was given quarters inside the undamaged wing of the palace, a room far grander than anything I had ever slept in, with windows that looked out over gardens untouched by the flames. I did not see much of Ciela during those first days. She was recovering, her lungs still healing from the smoke, and the palace healers kept her closely watched. But on the third evening, a guard came to my door and told me the princess wished to see me in the garden. I found her sitting on a stone bench beneath a tree with silver leaves that caught the moonlight and scattered it across the grass. She looked stronger now, color back in her face, though her voice still carried a faint roughness when she spoke. "You did not have to agree to my mother's plan," she said as I sat down beside her. "You could have refused. Many would have." "I thought about it," I admitted. "But something about the way you looked at me in that garden made me want to find out more, not less." She smiled faintly at that. "My mother believes in signs. She believes the universe sends us exactly what we need, at exactly the right moment. I have never fully believed that myself. But I will admit, watching you carry me out of a fire, while guards who had sworn to protect me stood frozen at the tree line, it was hard not to wonder if she might be right, just this once." I told her about my life before that night, about the long quiet stretches between deliveries, about how I had grown used to being alone, with only the hum of my ship's engine for company. She listened closely, asking questions that showed she was truly curious, rather than simply being polite, and in turn, she told me about her own life, about the weight of being born into a family whose every decision shaped an entire moon, about how rare it was for her to speak with someone who had not already decided what she should think or say. We talked until the moon overhead had climbed high above the garden walls, and by the time I finally returned to my quarters, something inside me had shifted. The strange arrangement that had been forced onto us both no longer felt quite so strange. Over the following days, we spent more time together, walking through gardens that had survived the fire, sharing meals in quiet corners of the palace, away from watching eyes, learning the small details about each other that no royal announcement could ever capture. I learned that she loved the sound of rain on glass, that she had once secretly wished to leave the palace and travel among the stars, the way I had spent my whole life doing. She learned that I had never had much of a home to return to, and that perhaps that was part of why I had run into a burning building without a second thought. There was nothing waiting for me anywhere else that I was afraid to lose. Not everyone on the moon was pleased with the Queen's sudden decision. Whispers followed me through palace hallways, questions about whether an outsider, especially one from a species so different from their own, could truly understand what it meant to stand beside their future ruler. I heard the whispers, and I understood the worry behind them, even when the words themselves stung. One evening, a minister named Corwin approached me in a quiet hallway, his expression careful and measured. He was an older man, thin and pale like all his people, with eyes that studied me the way a merchant studies a stranger's coin, unsure if it is real or counterfeit. "You saved her life," he said. "That much cannot be denied. But saving a life and building one together are very different things. Have you considered what it will mean to stand beside her when the fire is no longer the danger, when it is politics and doubt and the weight of an entire people watching your every move?" "I have thought about very little else," I admitted honestly. "But I have also learned that the right thing to do rarely announces itself with certainty. Sometimes you simply have to walk toward it and trust that your feet will find solid ground." Corwin studied me a moment longer before giving a small nod, not quite approval, but not quite doubt either. It was, I understood later, the closest thing to acceptance I would receive from him for some time. The night before the wedding, I found myself standing alone on a balcony, overlooking the garden where I had once laid Ciela on the grass, and prayed she would keep breathing. The palace had been rebuilt in the weeks since the fire, its towers gleaming under fresh moonlight, though scorch marks still lingered in places the builders had not yet reached. Ciela joined me there, her steps quiet on the stone floor, her presence settling beside me, like something that had always belonged there. We stood in silence for a while, watching the stars scatter across the sky above her moon. "Are you afraid?" she asked finally. "A little," I admitted. "Not of you, never of you, but of everything that comes after tomorrow, the expectations, the weight of it all." She reached over and took my hand, her fingers cool against mine, steady, despite everything that had happened in the weeks since the fire first tore through her home. "We will carry it together," she said. "That is what tomorrow means, is it not? Not one person walking through flame alone, but two people walking through whatever comes next, side by side." I looked at her then, really looked, and understood that whatever fear I still carried mattered far less than the certainty settling quietly in my chest. I had run into a burning building without knowing her name, without knowing what waited for me inside, driven only by the simple belief that someone needed help, and I was close enough to give it. That same simple belief was carrying me now, toward a future I had never imagined for myself, toward a life beside a woman who had somehow become impossible to imagine my life without. The wedding took place the next morning beneath a sky so clear it seemed the fire had never touched it at all. Guests filled the garden, nobles and common folk standing together for the first time in living memory, drawn by curiosity and, perhaps, by something closer to hope. The queen stood at the front, her silver eyes bright with something that looked almost like pride, watching as her daughter walked toward me across the grass where I had once carried her, unconscious and barely breathing, away from a fire that had nearly taken everything. When Ciela reached my side, she smiled, and I understood that whatever strange path had led us here, whatever impossible decision had been made in the chaos of that burning night, it had led us exactly where we were meant to be. I still do not fully understand how one impulsive choice, made in the middle of a burning night, led me here, standing beside a woman I had known for only a few short weeks, surrounded by people who had once looked at me with nothing but suspicion and doubt. But I have stopped questioning it. Some fires burn things down, others, it turns out, simply clear the way for something new to grow.